The pen tool is one of the most powerful yet misunderstood tools in Illustrator. Using the pen tool takes practice. You won't become a master by watching this video, but you will learn how to use it here. Let's take a closer look at how to use the pen tool. Now I'm beginning this video with the pen.ai file already open on my computer. And I'm going to start by utilizing the pen tool in its most basic manner. And so before I dive into the artwork here, what I'm going to do is select the pen tool. And I just want to make sure that you understand, if you go to the layers panel, you want to make sure that you're on the art layer, because the other layers contain artwork that we really don't want to be adjusting. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now down here at the bottom of my document, I'm going to start drawing with the pen tool in a very basic fashion. So if I just click once with the pen tool, I'm going to create what's called an anchor point. Now an anchor point doesn't really do anything. I'm actually going to zoom in here to make it a little bit easier to see. And so if I click in another area, it's going to create another anchor point. Now I currently have this path being stroked with a color, and that's fine. That'll make it a little bit easier to see. But I just want you to understand that the pen tool is essentially a connect the dots tool. So every anchor point that I create, Illustrator is going to draw a line segment in between those anchor points. And as I just click, it's only going to draw straight lines. So no matter what shape you draw, it's just going to continue drawing straight lines from point to point. And when I get back to the originating location and I click, it'll close the path. Now, there's a trick to using the tool this way. I'm going to go ahead and delete this path by pressing delete 2 times on my keyboard. Because if I click to create an anchor point, and then I hold down the Shift key, no matter where I click, it's going to draw a perfectly horizontal, vertical, or angled line to that anchor point. So you might have noticed, like, even though I hold down Shift and click up here, it draws an anchor point down here because it can only draw perpendicular or 45-degree angle lines when I hold down the Shift key. Now we can use that to our advantage. So I'm going to press delete twice, and if I navigate up here into my artwork, you can see that we have some areas where we have straight lines connecting these different topics. But in this case, for here, we need to create a line that kind of connects this area right here. And that'd be a bit difficult to do with the line segment tool, although we could probably do it. We need to draw multiple line segments to make that work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use that technique I just showed you. Now I do have my Smart Guides turned on, which you can access by going to View and choosing Smart Guides. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover up here, and when my cursor is kind of centered within the type, I'm just going to click once to create an anchor point. And then I'm going to move over, and I want to try to find the center of that gap. And you may or may not get the Smart Guides here, but I'm just going to hold Shift and click. And then I'm going to come down here and hold Shift and click. And I'm going to come way over here and hold Shift and click. Now, the pen tool wants to keep going. It wants to keep going and keep continuing to draw the line. So if I were to accidentally click over here, you can see that the pen tool wants to keep going and connecting the dots. So I'm going to undo that. And the way that you tell Illustrator that you're finished with that path is simply hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows and click to deselect that path. And you can see that that's drawn a very nice path that has been created. And we're going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to click. And then I'm going to Shift click around here, Shift click over here, Shift click, and one more Shift click. And you can see that we're drawing the sections, as we need them. And then maybe we'll do one more over here. So I'll Command click over here to deselect that path. And we can just kind of click, Shift click, and Shift click. And you can always make adjustments to these after the fact, and that's where the direct selection tool comes into play. You can click on an anchor point, and then you can modify that in any way you want. And you can even use the Shift key to kind of move it in a perfectly vertical or horizontal direction if you want to. So I'll go ahead and undo that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the pen tool to a whole other level by drawing curved paths. And so if you go to your Artboards panel, I'm going to double click on the flower artboard. And what I've done is created a template layer, and this is just a very basic illustration, but if you think about how you might create this otherwise, you might really have a challenge on your hand, because certainly the pencil tool is not going to allow me to create a precise enough path. I could try. Let's go ahead and use this. I'm going to try to trace this perfectly, and as you can see, even with a Wacom tablet, my hand is not quite steady enough to follow that the way I want it to. So I'll go ahead and delete that. So we'll go back to the pencil tool. And one thing I'm going to show you before I actually use this tool, click on the direct selection tool and then back on the pen tool. And what that does is basically when I hold down the Command or Control key, it's going to temporarily activate the last selection tool chosen. So if I would have clicked on this and then the pen tool, notice holding down the Command or Control key accesses this tool instead of this one. And the one I want is a direct selection tool. So I'll click on that, go back to the pen tool. Now, with the pen tool to draw curves, it's a little bit of a different story, because when I used the just single click method to draw straight lines, it's drawing what are called corner points. And that's because I'm just clicking and letting go. Now I'm going to delete that, because this time to draw curves, we need to create a smooth point. And to do that, you're going to click and drag. Now what that does is it creates an anchor point like we did before. I'll go ahead and zoom in to make this a little bit easier to see. It creates an anchor point like it did before, but it pulled out a directional handle. And what that does, this directional handle is telling Illustrator no matter where I click next, it's going to start drawing a line segment in an upward direction before it connects that path. So no matter where I click, if I click right here, you'll notice that it started going in an upward direction and then went around to meet that anchor point. So I'm going to delete that, but if I click and drag again, and if I come over here and click and drag, you'll notice that now you can bend and twist this line segment in any shape that you want. And if I let go, I can come over here. If I click and drag up, it's going to create a line segment in that direction. And what you can do is if you hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows, you can point this line segment in a different direction. Or you can just click right on the anchor point to terminate the line segment. And now no matter where I click, it's going to draw a straight line because it converted that half to a corner point. Now let's put this into practice. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. And then I'll start by zooming in on this flower here. So how would we create this flower? And you can follow along here, but it's going to take a little bit of practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here and I'm going to drag up, because I know that my first line segment, I want to be going in a curved direction upwards. And now I'm going to come over here and click and drag. And you'll see that I can pretty much bend this into shape. Now don't worry if you didn't get it perfect the first time, because what I can do is hold down my Alt key or my Option key and click on this directional handle to adjust this exactly where I need it to be. Now because I did not deselect this path, what I can do is right down here, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, I'm going to click and pull out another directional handle. This one needs to go in this direction. So when I come over here and click, you can see I can bend that into position. Hold down the Alt key, I'm still holding down the mouse key as well, and I'm going to point this over this way. And you're not always going to get it the first time. This one's a little bit trickier. But you can always hold down the Alt key and just readjust this. And then if I hold down Command and click on the anchor point, it's going to show me both directions of the handles on that path. Now I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key to point this in the correct direction. Now I'm going to come over here, bend this into position. Looks like I have to tweak this a little bit more, so I'm going to hold down Alt. I'm just making these changes as needed. Remember, Command or Control click on the anchor point will show me both directional handles. And then I'll Alt or Option click. And I'm just going through here and I'm finishing up this flower. As you can see, even me having plenty of experience with this tool, I don't get it perfect every time. So I have to go back and just make some minor adjustments. Now when we get back to this point, what you want to do is hold down your Alt or Option key as you click and drag on this closing point, and that's going to close the path, but then allow you to make that final adjustment for your flower. And now for this flower, if I go to my selection tool, you can see that this is one path, and if I wanted to, I could make my stroke a little bit bigger just so I can see this. And if I wanted to fill it with a different color, maybe pick like a nice lime green or something, and we can fill that flower with that color. Now I'm going to get rid of that fill for a second because I want to point out this here, I would never draw with the pen tool because I have an awesome tool up here, which is the ellipse tool. And that I can do by just clicking and dragging, adding the Shift key, and if I hold down the space bar, I can reposition as I drag until I get it just the way that I want it to. There's my center portion. And when it comes to doing this section down here, it's really just a matter of grabbing your pen tool. I'm going to go ahead and click here and drag. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to make it easier to see. Then I'll come down here, click and drag, and I'll just bend that into position. Make some tweaks or adjustments there. Now here's where I need to reset my cursor, so I'll go back to direct selection and back to the pen tool. And now I can Command or Control click to reposition this anchor point. And now I've got the stem. And then to just finish this up, we need to draw the leaves here. So remember, Command or Control click on a white area so that you're not connecting the dots from drawing the stem. And I'm just going to click and drag in an upward direction. Then I'm going to come over here, click and drag to bend that point into position. And before I let go of the mouse, I'll hold down Alt or Option to point this in a downward direction. And then I'm going to Alt or Option click on this point to bend that into position. I'll wrap this up by doing one more leaf here. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag to draw an anchor point with a directional handle. Click and drag. This happens sometimes. You just have to readjust it. Something like that. Alt or Option, point it in this direction, and then Alt click to terminate the path, and then bend it into position. And there I have my flower. With some practice, you'll become proficient using the pen tool. And before you know it, it will become the first tool that you reach for when creating precise, complex artwork for your own projects.